Sleep is a very misunderstood part of our health that we don't really talk much about unless it becomes a problem. When it becomes a problem, it becomes a really big problem that influences every aspect of our lives. So most of us have the experience of generally being pretty good sleepers for the most part, but then having some challenges depending on situational stuff that might be going on. I think most of us had trouble sleeping during the pandemic to some degree. Many people did. Many of us here in Asheville had maybe a couple of sleepless or at least restless nights right after the hurricane. That was a challenging time for many of us for many reasons, including sleep. And what we find is that for the most part, most people are pretty good sleepers up until an event takes place. Most of us can say, I was an okay sleeper until fill in the blank, right? It's different for everybody. So I mentioned a couple of really common ones that we all relate to, but it could also be a marriage, a divorce, a new job, new baby, moving to a new place, lots of things. Any transitions can cause that. And so when that happens, we have to figure out how do I fix my sleep with all of this going on. So that's a big part of what I do. I work a lot with people who are struggling with the after effects of, all right, the event is past, but now what do I do? I'm still not sleeping well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. So we all know that sleep is crucial just from our own lived experience. But why? What is it about sleep that is so important? What's going on physically inside the body? I'm not going to get into the really technical nuance of this. You're here for community class, not a PhD lecture, so I'm going to stick with that. But I wanted to really get started getting into a little bit of the purpose of sleep and what that really looks like. So there's three main things that happen in sleep. And, again, there's a lot more nuance to this than I'm going to get into, but generally speaking, one of the biggest things that we notice is that it helps us to restore energy. And I think most of us can relate to this, where if we have a difficult night of sleep, we start the day the next day and we just drag. We just feel like, ugh, I don't want to get going. I don't feel good. We just don't have the energy that we wish that we had to engage in life and to really feel our best and do what we need to do. So when we don't sleep well, it's harder for us to restore that energy and move forward the next day. One thing that's interesting to think about, though, is that sometimes we get into this cycle where if we wake up in the morning and we say, ooh, I didn't get a good night of sleep, therefore I'm going to have a bad day today. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? When you start the day saying it's going to be a bad day, guess what's going to happen? It's going to be a bad day. It's amazing to me how much we can accomplish on so little sleep when we need to. We don't want to. It doesn't necessarily feel good, but we can definitely push through more than we think we can. So we know that restoring energy is a huge piece of that. Another big piece of it here is memory consolidation. So we have all of these experiences during the day, right? All the conversations we have, all the things that we do, and our brains get to decide which parts of that we keep, which parts of that we throw away. And a lot of that decision making happens in our sleep. So sleep is the time when memories get encoded in more to long-term memory. So one thing that I want to mention at this point, I'm going to take a quick little detour and then come back. One thing that I'm not going to talk in detail about today is all of the stuff that happens in your body when you don't sleep. I'm not going to scare you with statistics about being more likely to come down with all kinds of illness and chronic disease and things like that. We know that when we're not sleeping well on a chronic basis, it impacts our immune system. And that's all we really need to know about that right now. But one of the big questions that people ask me often is about memory and about the risk of dementia. So I hear this a lot, right? People come to me and they say, I'm not sleeping well and I'm forgetful. I'm not remembering these details. I missed a doctor's appointment last week. It just slipped my mind completely. And that's not like me. And I'm really worried that because I'm not sleeping well, are these the signs of dementia? Is that happening right now? So quick, fix my sleep so that I don't have to think about that anymore. So that's not an issue. What we find is that the memory effects of poor sleep are very similar to what we think about with early dementia. So there's a big overlap in the way those things present. So I'll give you an example of that. So I have 3 children. My oldest is 5, my twins are 3. You can imagine how little sleep I got for those first few years. So when I would, go about my day, I'd do my best after having difficult nights with the kids, right? And sure enough, I would forget things. Things would just completely slip my mind. And I just felt like my brain wasn't functioning the way that it was supposed to. Was it dementia? Or was it poor sleep because of parenthood? Right? It was poor sleep because of parenthood, obviously. But the symptoms can look similar. So I want to put that out there kind of as a point of hope, if nothing else, because if it's something that people are concerned about, sometimes improving the sleep can make those memory symptoms go away anyway, because it was never dementia to begin with. And I do a lot of dementia screenings for my folks because of that fear. And of course, if I do the screening and something comes up significant, we, go in that direction and decide what to do from there. But I think only once or twice in my 10 years of experience has one of those screenings come up significant. And the rest of the time, it's truly I'm not thinking well because I'm not sleeping well, because my brain doesn't have a chance to consolidate those memories. Yeah. The other thing is that it's the brain's cleaning cycle. So I'm kind of a science nerd, right? So this is my favorite. This is the one that I think is super interesting. So we always have cerebral fluid flowing through the brain, the spaces in the brain. But at night, when we are in deep sleep, the cells get a little bit smaller. They shrink just a little bit to make a little more space for that fluid to flow through. And so what this does is it allows for toxin removal, removal of dead cells. It promotes growth and repair of the cells. And so it really is this cleaning cycle that we go through. This happens specifically in deep sleep, which we also call delta wave sleep. We call it stage 3 sleep. There's a few different names for it. When we think about the different stages of sleep, and I'll just mention this really quickly, for a long time we thought that we had REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, which is when we dream. We kind of assumed that's the most important kind of sleep. So we would lump it into REM sleep, and then all the other stages of sleep were in this other category over here that we call non-REM sleep. It's one or the other. And we kind of threw away all the non-REM sleep as just time that you're not active, like nothing's going on. So for a long time we thought the REM sleep was the most important, most restorative. And so there's a lot of focus on that. But now we know that's not true. Now we know that each of those stages has its own unique characteristics and its purpose. And so delta wave or deep sleep is in one of those, the non-REM sleep category. And this is the most restorative stage of sleep, more so than REM sleep, though they're all important, right? We need all of them to feel good. And so when we're in that stage of sleep, usually we get the bulk of our deep sleep at the beginning of our night, and then we get the bulk of our REM sleep at the end of our night. It's almost like the body knows that it needs to prioritize deep sleep. So kind of keeping that in mind too. There are other stages of sleep beyond REM that are very important too. So we know that all of this is important for our health in so many different ways. And there's a couple of different things that happen to promote sleep, to really make sure that we're getting the sleep that we need. And so to illustrate this, I want to show you this graph. This is probably the most technical we're going to get today here. But I want you to think about these two different processes that take place. We've got, up here at the top, we've got what this calls the sleep load, also called sleep pressure. That's the word that I tend to use more, sleep pressure than sleep load. And this is what helps us to feel sleepy and actually fall asleep at night. So this is promoting sleep up here at the top. Down here at the bottom, this is called the alerting signal on this graph. And this is what keeps us awake. So the body has these two separate processes that work hand in hand. And it's almost like it passes the baton back and forth. So during the day, the alerting signal, the wake drive, is in charge. And then at night, it passes control over to your sleep drive. And so we want each of those to take turns. We want to share. And sometimes they don't quite work in tandem the way that they should. Sometimes one of them takes over one shouldn't. Sometimes one of them's not as strong as it should be. But what we see here is that during the daytime, you see the alerting signal is, those arrows are higher, right? So the alerting signal is kind of taking over. And the sleep load, those arrows are pretty close to the top there for the most part. But they get longer and longer as the day goes on until we have enough sleep load to sleep. We'll talk about that on the next slide in more detail. One thing that's so interesting about the alerting signal is that it also increases with the sharp spike right before bed. And so this is where we have that handoff, right? Some of us know this experience, we know other people that have this experience, where the most productive hour of their day is right before they go to bed. These are the people who are running around, they're getting all the chores done, they're washing the dishes, they're doing all the stuff right before bed. I also see this in my kids. So I always like to use my kids as an example of this, because they could be literally running around in circles, jumping off the walls, an hour before bedtime. And you would look at this and think, there's no way these kids are going to be asleep in an hour. It's not going to happen, right? They're just wild at that point. But they do, right? So we have this handoff where you have this spike in activity, this little spike in alertness, and then you get to bed and it calms down quickly. You see that these arrows come down very quickly on the side as soon as you get to bed. And then that's when the sleep drive takes over. So it's not bad, or it's not something to be worried about when you have that energy at night. But a lot of people are concerned about it. Why am I not more tired? Why am I not more relaxed right now? It's okay if you're not. It's not necessarily that way. All right, and so for the next part, I want to talk more about sleep load, and I have a fun way that I want to do this. All right. So there's not a lot of this today. I was hoping for one volunteer to help me with something. If no one is up for it, that's okay. But what I was hoping for is someone with really good lungs who could blow up a balloon. You want to volunteer? Thank you. Come on up. What's your name? Wow, good to meet you. All right, choose your favorite color if it's in there. There you go. And I need just a good full balloon. Don't pop it. All right, because if you pop it, it'll scare me and I'll scream and no one will scream. Big full balloon. All right. So when we wake up in the day for the morning, we have an empty balloon. And all the things that we do during the day fill up this balloon. One more good breath. There's a room in here. Cool. So we fill up the balloon during the day with all of the activities that we do. Perfect. Thank you. All right, let's hang out for a minute. So the activities that we do, the foods that we eat, the emotions that we feel, all of this builds sleep pressure during the day. So in this example, the air in this balloon is sleep pressure. So what we want at the end of the day, when it's time to go to bed, is a great big full balloon, just like you have here, right? So the kind that is nice and firm, makes a neat sound when you flick it. That's what you want. And then when you go to bed at night, with all of the sleep pressure that's built up, falling asleep is like letting go of the balloon. So if you can hold it up in front of you, then let all that hard work go.
Quickly.
Yeah, just let it go. There you go. Right? So the way that the balloon empties quickly, almost, I've got one more thing for you. So the way that the balloon empties quickly is the way that our bodies use sleep pressure quickly. We need enough built up to be able to propel us to sleep as the air in the balloon just propelled it across the room, right?
So what happens after that? You're not asleep.
So that's a good question. That's what we're going to get to. So the next thing I want to ask you to do is build up one more time. I'm going to demonstrate a little bit of that. So there's a lot of ways that that can go wrong, right? So one of the things that can happen is we get that initial onset of sleep, but then we wake up and we have a hard time falling back to sleep. There's a lot of things that we can do with that. But the other thing that I want to demonstrate, I'll take it here. Grab that from you right there. Thank you. All right, let's say you had a bad night last night. So today, I'm going to take a nap. Right? I'm tired. I want a nap. Here's my balloon. Here's my nap. Okay. It's using the sleep pressure that we've built up. Okay. Now my balloon's smaller. Let's say I'm still tired. It's late in the evening. I'm sitting on the couch watching a movie with my husband, and I am nodding off, right? I'm just doing this little bobblehead thing, just for a moment, right? Little micro sleeps, right? Every time I do that, right, there's a little bit more air that comes out. Now, this is what my balloon looks like at bedtime. Right? So we had a balloon just a moment ago that spun through the air and gave us a really good demonstration of the onset of sleep. I have napped, I've used my sleep pressure, I've dozed, and this one, not quite as impressive, right? Thank you.
Okay.
Bravo! So a big part of what we want to do when we think about sleep and sleep pressure and what can promote sleep is making sure that we are building up the right amount of sleep pressure at the right time and preserving that as needed. Now the other side of this that I intentionally did not ask you to demonstrate is when your balloon gets too big, right? The other end of this can happen and your balloon pops. When that happens, that's when we have a really hard time staying awake during the day. I always want to make sure that my clients don't have balloons that are popping because then we are dozing off when we don't want to doze off. We are snoozing for meetings. We are not safe to drive, potentially. There's a lot of things that can come with that we want to be very careful about. So when we think about what do I do to get a better night's sleep, this is always a good thing to ask yourself. What am I doing for my sleep pressure? Am I nodding off before bed? I'll also mention another point about that. I hear this story a lot, right? And this may resonate with you. I was so sleepy. I was sitting on the couch. I was watching that movie, and I just could not keep my eyes open. And I thought, oh, if I just get my body in bed, I'll fall right asleep. And then what happens when you get your body in bed? You are wide awake. And what is this? I was just dozing off on the couch. Mm-hmm. Well, dozing off on the couch releases some of that sleep pressure. The act of moving your body from one location to another is not what's stimulating you. That is not a problem. It's partly the fact that you have used some of your sleep pressure. So that's important to keep in mind too, that either you might want to go to bed a little bit earlier so that you can use that sleep pressure, or stand up and kind of move around a little bit while you're watching TV rather than sitting very still and letting that happen accidentally. So that's all pieces to keep in mind too.
So if it does happen, you should just soldier on, kind of try to wake yourself up and let it rebuild?
It depends on the time. Are you thinking like right before bed?
I'm thinking maybe, say, bedtime's 11, maybe it's, say, 10-ish.
10-ish? Yeah. I'd go to bed at that point. I think that would be late enough that you could probably go to bed. The problem with trying to soldier on is that when we are dozing off and we try to wake ourselves up, every time we do that, we get this little jolt of adrenaline, right? We're consciously and purposefully saying, no, I can't sleep right now. I have to stay awake. And when we repeat that often enough, if you're sitting there for half an hour to an hour, and every few minutes you're going, right? Then your body gets into this really uncomfortable pattern that it associates dozing off with making adrenaline and waking you up. The body doesn't know the difference between sitting on the couch and trying to stay awake on purpose versus now I'm in bed and I should be asleep. So just kind of like pushing through and soldiering on has its downside in that capacity. So you just want to be careful how you do it. If you are maybe standing up, if you choose to keep your evening chores for later, like I've had a lot of clients who do need to stay up later as part of their process, and so to avoid that like jolting awake effect, I often recommend that you save evening chores for later when you're tired, so when you're sleepy. So right after dinner, go sit on the couch and watch that movie when you're a little bit more awake. And then later on, when you feel like you're ready to doze off, but it's too early to go to bed, then get up and go wash the dishes. Because you're moving, you're doing something, you're preventing yourself from dozing off. And it's a more consistent, sort of streamlined activity than that sudden jolt, every so often. So there's different ways to work that out. And there's a little creative process that comes with figuring out what works for each individual. So this is a lot of the stuff that I do with my clients, is try to figure out the right solution for each individual. How do we handle that? So, good question. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay, so let's take a look at some of the different sleep disorders that are out there. I talk a lot about insomnia because that is my favorite. That's what I do all the time. But there's a lot more to it than that. These are just a few of the sleep disorders that are out there. These are the most common ones. And I generally lumped them into these three categories to illustrate that sleep can be impacted in different ways. And when they are impacted in different ways, we treat it and fix them in very different ways as well. So generally speaking, we have this category of medical problems here. And so the most common sleep apnea that just about everyone's heard of. There's a couple of different kinds of sleep apnea that fall in this category. And then I mentioned restless legs, which is that kind of hard to describe, kind of itchy, kind of creepy crawly, kind of twitchy feeling in the legs when you're tired before you fall asleep. That really can't be satisfied unless you move your legs. Like you have to move your legs to make the feeling go away. And then PLMS, it's periodic limb movement syndrome, which was just too much to put there. This is something that you probably don't know you have, but your partner does. This is what happens when we kick or we move a lot in our sleep, and we sleep through it, but our bed partner often does not. We're waking them up. So they usually identify this before the person does. And so each of these is sort of in this category of medical because this is stuff that happens in the body. I think of this as the stuff that happens from the nose down that can influence our sleep, that needs to be diagnosed and treated by an MD specifically. We'll talk about why in just a second. And then we get to the psychological pieces over here. So this is insomnia specifically and nightmare disorder are the two common ones here. So I've talked a little bit about why insomnia falls in psychological when I was mentioning earlier about how we usually are pretty good sleepers in life up until the event. that changes our ability to sleep. And so the event may be over. We may have returned from our evacuation vacation, as my family called it. The utilities are back on. We've returned to work. Daycare is open again. On the surface, it looks like everything's back to normal, but I'm not sleeping. Why? And this is what that part gets at. We're not sleeping because we ended up learning a pattern of sleeplessness. Even if it's not a conscious thought, the body got in this pattern of not sleeping well. And so then we have to figure out how to get the body out of that unhelpful pattern. That pattern was really helpful when we were away because we evacuated somewhere we'd never been. So my kids were restless at night. So it was helpful for me to not sleep well because I needed to be there for my kids. It is no longer helpful for me to be awake at night, but my body thinks it is. So I've got to figure out a way to change that pattern. So it's the pattern changes, the behavior changes that make this psychological. Nightmare disorder, that's another really interesting one to treat. You can ask me about that later on at the end if you want to know more about that, but that's another one that I do in my practice. Not as much, and I just don't see it as often, but there are definitely ways that we can work through recurrent nightmares and change that so that it's not a problem. And then circadian. So this is when we're not sleeping when we would like to sleep. This is the timing of our sleep. This has nothing to do with the quality or the quantity of our sleep, it's just the timing. There's a lot of ways that the timing of our sleep can be disrupted. Jet lag down here is the one that I think most of us can relate to the best. You know how that feels. You travel across time zones and then you just can't get settled into this new time zone. I just feel bad. My sleep is just off. And it takes a while for your body's clock, your circadian pattern, to get back with the program. Yeah, I mentioned this is everything that can disrupt your sleep from the nose down. So this is stuff that requires a sleep study to be diagnosed. So when people struggle with sleep, a lot of times there's this thought of, well, I'm not sleeping well. Let me go to one of these sleep clinics, the sleep centers, and they'll do a sleep study and they'll figure it out and they'll help me out. And if it's one of these medical things like sleep apnea, that is true. That is where those sleep centers really shine. It's when it comes to treating and diagnosing sleep apnea in particular. They're great at that. Not so great with the psychological or the circadian piece. All the sleep clinics in Asheville refer to me pretty consistently for that. And so when we think about having one of those medical diagnoses, the treatment for that is either going to be medication or more commonly devices like a CPAP. There's a couple of different kinds of CPAPs and 1,000 different mask styles to choose from and all that good stuff. But the thing about that, and this is where it says symptom management up here, the thing about that is that is not going to cure the problem. It's not going to cure sleep apnea, for example, but it's going to manage the symptoms adequately. So for most people, once you start on a CPAP, you're probably going to just stay on CPAP indefinitely. A lot of people feel comfortable with that and love it. My husband uses one. He has sleep apnea. It has saved our marriage because now we can go to sleep at night. Other people never get comfortable with the mask, and it can be a problem. And there's a big adjustment period with that. There are some other less common but still available alternatives to a CPAP. There's an implant that can be surgically implanted that can stimulate breathing every so often. There's a few different things along those lines. But generally, it's symptom management, and it's more in that category. And medication, I mentioned that too, because sometimes medicine can just help you sleep through more disruption and be a tool to use. All right, and then the psychological piece here to talk about. I kind of mentioned this a few minutes ago. That this is related to these repeated experiences. you get used to waking up at night or having a hard time falling asleep or getting up too early in the day or wherever that shows up for you. And so it's that repeated kind of process that happens. And so I kind of mentioned the behavioral interventions. I already talked a little bit about that, so I'm not going to go into a whole lot more detail about what that looks like now, except to say that the medication piece, this is an interesting part of this because for most people, when we're not sleeping well, a lot of times we go to our doctor and say, hey, I'm not sleeping well. What do you have to help me out here? Medicine like Ambien, that's a common one, Lunesta, Zolpidem, which is the generic for Ambien, anti-anxiety medications like Xanax, Lorazepam, and usually those are the main ones. Trazodone is another common one. Those are easy to get, they are cheap, and they work. They're usually effective. So medication for sleep problems, especially insomnia, looks like a really good option on the surface. Quick, easy, inexpensive. The problem with that, though, is that most of them have significant negative long-term implications. If you take a sleep aid once in a while, you're probably fine. But when you start taking it regularly, then you start this process of becoming reliant on medication. Either physically, in the case of one like Ambien, for example, you can have a real physical reliance on it, or emotionally, where you think, ooh, I can't sleep unless I take this because I don't believe my body is going to take care of itself. And then we have this fear that shows up, this anxiety about sleep that really creeps in if it's not already there. There's also other consequences of taking long-term medication in some of these cases, like the hypnotics, like Ambien. There is a real correlation with increased risk of dementia with long-term use of some of these. So I've got a lot of clients coming to me these days whose primary care physicians will no longer prescribe their sleep aid that they've been on for, in some cases, decades. And it's a really scary process because if you rely on this pill to get you to sleep and then all of a sudden you can't have it, well, I don't have another option. What's my safety net? And so my job is to build a safety net with them and help them come off the medication, which I've seen many, many people do very successfully. So it's very possible to do that. And so this is why we also say that the behavioral interventions are often curative. We actually fix the problem, we not just mask the symptoms. And so I see this so often in my work with my clients. I do follow-ups with my clients periodically, and it's usually good news. When we look at the broader research of CBT for insomnia, it's very similar. So when you do research studies about the long-term effects of doing the work that I do compared with medication use, the effects are really clear that the behavioral piece just simply works better for resolving symptoms. The downside of it is that it takes a little bit longer sometimes. There's more work to do. It's a real effort that you put into it. You invest your time and your energy. It's not as affordable for a lot of people to do that. So there's, it's a bit of a trade-off. But for long-term benefits, the research that's out there is really clear on what works better. All right, and then the circadian piece. All right, so I mentioned before, this is the timing of the sleep. So, is anyone here a night owl? Anyone a minute? I see one hand in the back. All right. Is anyone here a morning lark? Yes, I see one hand. 2 hands. Perfect. Yeah. And so when we think about those two different, kind of sleep cycles, some would say that the night owls have a delayed circadian phase, which means staying up really late and then wanting to sleep later into the day. And that just works better for that person's body. And then we have the morning larks over here, right? These are the ones who just really want to be in bed by 8 o'clock. Like, it just feels so good to crawl into bed that early. But I'm going to start my day at 4 a.m. and it's going to be great. I'm going to drink my coffee while it's hot. I'm going to read my book. I'm going to do my yoga. Right, that's my day. And it feels really great. There's nothing physically wrong with either of those. Both of those are healthy. The problem is when it interferes with our life. The problem is when I'm a night owl, well, I want to sleep until 10 a.m., but I have a client to see at 9. Now what do I do? The problem is when I'm a morning lark over here, and I want to be in bed by 8 o'clock, but I have family visiting, and they want to stay up and talk or play a board game or something until like 10. Who stays up that late? Who does that? Right? So it's only a problem when it gets in the way of life. And I think a lot of people kind of lean into this belief, like we have early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise, that old saying. Right? And so that kind of indicates there's something morally superior about going to bed earlier. And we have the stereotype of the lazy teenager who wants to stay up all night and then sleep all day the next day. Those just simply aren't accurate, right? It's just different ways that our bodies are programmed. By the way, teenagers naturally have a delayed circadian phase. Like, this is pretty much universal that all teenagers are going to be night owls and going to physically need to sleep later during the day. It's not about defiance. It's not about being lazy during the day. That is biologically how they're programmed. They can't help it, no matter how much you tell them to get off their phone and go to bed. They can't.
So it's why do high schools keep deciding earlier and earlier?
Right? Exactly.
That is a great question. That's my soapbox. This makes no sense to me at all.
High school should start at 10 a.m., not 8 a.m.
And there's some districts in Florida that are working on that.
Yeah.
And I saw a really great presentation about a study that was done in California where they switched the start times of the elementary schools and the high schools, because the elementary schools tend to start a little bit later, even though the little ones wake up earlier. Right? My 5-year-old is up at 5:45 or 6 just about every day. Does not work well with my circadian system, but that's okay. And so what they did is they switched the start times, and they found that everyone's mood improved.
Mm-hmm.
There was no dramatic impact on the timing of after-school activities. The parents were happy with the switch. Like, it just worked better. But again, the decision makers don't always read the research or know what to do to use it. But yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. Okay, so a little quiz, true or false. I've got a few questions here to address a couple of misconceptions, clear some things up about sleep while we're here. So this is a test. All right, so question number 1 here, and I just want to, kind of get a show of hands of what your answers would be. So question 1, everyone should get 8 hours of sleep. Let me see who thinks this is true. I see a maybe. Okay, who thinks this is false? A+. You got it. This is one of those things that we hear in our culture all the time, the importance of 8 hours of sleep. But the reality of it is that everyone's physical body has a different set of needs. If we compared this to how many calories we need to eat in the day, we would just laugh at it, right? I'm not going to need the same amount of calories as someone who's training for a marathon. It just doesn't make sense, and no one's going to argue that. Why would we assume that everyone needs the exact same amount of sleep every night, right? 8 hours is kind of this average for the population. So it's sort of in the middle, right? But we can have healthy sleep as few as 5 or 6 hours, as many as 9 or 10 hours. Everyone's needs are unique, and we need to honor that. Our needs change over time as well. So I get a lot of people that come to me and they say, I used to sleep 8 hours, and now I can only get 6 hours of sleep. What's that about? And so we talk about how needs change over time, based partly on energy use, right? Back at the beginning, that was one of the functions of sleep, was energy restoration. You're going to use a lot more energy when you're in the middle of a career, going to work every day. You're actively parenting, right? You're doing all this stuff versus, hey, I'm an empty nester finally, and now I get to retire. I can put my feet up and watch that movie that I've been wanting to watch for the last 20 years. You know, it's going to be a different need that your body has. There's also the physical changes, especially for women, hormonal shifts that influence things. There's a lot that goes into it. But it's okay and it's healthy to notice that your actual need for sleep may decrease over your lifetime. Not anything to panic about, but a lot of people. Okay, true or false? If I feel tired, it must be because I'm not getting good sleep. True? Anyone over here? No hands. Okay, false. Okay. False. Good job. It's like you studied for this test. Yes. There's a lot of things that go into how we feel, but sleep tends to be used as a scapegoat. So, oh, I'm tired, must be because I'm not sleeping well. It could also be because you're stressed. It could also be because you did something that's physically strenuous. It could be, you might have inflammation in the body. You might be fighting off a virus you didn't realize you had caught somewhere along the line. It could be because your blood sugar isn't quite balanced, and we need to look at your nutrition. There's a lot of things that can go into how you feel when you're feeling being tired. Sleep is one. I don't want to make it sound like we never look at sleep as a problem here, but it's not the only one. All right. True or false? If I just work hard enough at my sleep hygiene, I'll be able to sleep. So the first time you see sleep hygiene. Right? Who thinks that if we just work hard enough, we can get it right and sleep better? Right? Nobody? False? All right. You are correct yet again. Good job. This is very false. The interesting thing about sleep is that the more control we try to exert over our sleep, the less successful we are in getting good sleep. And it's because of this perception that I'm worried, which is a key word, I'm worried that if I don't get it right, I'm not going to sleep. And so we put so much pressure on ourselves to get it right that it becomes self-defeating. So what happens when you get everything right, whatever that means for you, you still have a bad night, right? Then we get really scared, and it just makes the problem worse and worse. So the less we do to try to force sleep, the more likely we are to get good healthy sleep, which feels very counterintuitive. Okay, last but not least, if you have questions or want to talk about specific situations, you can get in touch with Erin Shadle. That's me. True? It's true. Yes. Very true. Okay. And to do that, this is my contact information. You've got my phone number down at the bottom. This is a QR code for my website.